These insurrection hearings have featured vital and dramatic testimony about coups and crimes. And yet for some, a standout moment came yesterday when Republican Rusty Bowers recounted his resistance to Trump's illegal demands as a matter of faith.
It is a tenet of my faith that the Constitution is divinely inspired, of my most basic foundational beliefs.
Now, that's not a common refrain for investigative hearings or for a lot of the Americans who have been outraged by the Trump administration's crime spree and its lack of ethics. In fact, American cities and democratic areas are increasingly secular places, which is something that Republican leaders used to just rail against. To take one example who's well known, the Nixon aide turned religious warrior, Pat Buchanan, who back in the day quite literally warned of secular Americans oppressing religious Americans.
The agenda that Clinton and Clinton would impose on America: abortion on demand, a litmus test for the Supreme Court, homosexual rights, discrimination against religious schools, women in combat units. That's change, all right. It's not the kind of change we can abide in a nation we still call God's country. There is a religious war going on.
A religious war. And that argument was central to the Republican Party's alliance with religious conservatives. After Clinton, the party leaned into a religious pitch for George W. Bush and spent years appointing the very judges who now are really, in a way, doing the opposite of Buchanan's warning. It is a Bush appointee, Justice Alito, who led and wrote the draft opinion that overrules Roe v. Wade and supports strict abortion bans. That's the draft we've seen, a ruling expected any week now after it was leaked in unusual circumstances. And that ruling going after women's rights is viewed as a capstone on a multi-decade religious quest to really, if we're being honest, make Scripture and certain selected religious tenets the foundation of American law. So judges appointed in a past era come in and try to change the rules so big government regulates women's lives and rights as if this were a long bygone era. Now, against that context, something else is also happening. Americans across the spectrum are actually more supportive of women's rights and choice. 79% supporting gender equality, most opposing overturning Roe, opposing the vision of these judges installed by politicians in bed with the religious right. And we have people moving away from politicized religion, taking cues even on the right from more secular leaders on the new right, like Tucker Carlson, who's really the most popular conservative on TV and does not push specifically Christian themes, focusing more on race, immigration, and class. Or a right-wing warrior cited most frequently as potentially next up in the GOP. You know who I'm talking about, DeSantis. Now, he attacks big government and COVID rules, but, quote, rarely discusses religion publicly. Now, several of those points and quotes and the attention here on this secular emphasis are drawn from a New York Times essay by a conservative writer tracing this shift that may be happening in plain sight, how today's Republican Party has begun its divorce from the religious right. And to document that, this Times piece suggests that ongoing conservative support for Trump reflects kind of a new normal, not some aberration. That 20 years ago might have been unthinkable that someone with Donald Trump's personal history, aggressively vulgar secular style, and obvious ignorance of Christianity could ever get the Republican nomination. Forget everything else. He just couldn't get past the religious right's power over the more conservative voting base. Well, Trump got the nomination twice. And some of his top rivals, as mentioned, are not much more publicly religious than he is, which is really saying something.
When I talk about the Bible, it's very personal, so I don't want to get into verses. I don't want to get into...
There's no verse that means a lot to you that you think about or cite?
The Bible means a lot to me, but I don't want to get into specifics.
You're an Old Testament guy or a New Testament guy?
Probably equal. I think it's just an incredible... The whole Bible is an incredible... You got to see this guy. Oh, I don't know what I said. I don't remember. He's going like, I don't remember. Oh, maybe that's what I said. You know, when we go in church and And when I drink my little wine and have my little cracker, I guess that's a form of asking for forgiveness. And I do that as often as possible.
Sure. But church-going Republicans were not fooled by a lot of that. In the 2016 primary, over 60% of Republicans who go to church weekly chose any other candidate but Trump, who was, of course, the most famous candidate and went on to win. So that's striking. He only got 32% of church-going Republicans. His nomination victory then was powered by these ascendant secular conservatives. He won 62% of Republicans who never go to church. They powered him. And there are signs that group remains potent on the right. In this Times essay, conservative writer Nate Hochman identifies this new group as, quote, non-college educated, middle and lower class white people with a populist hostility to the elites. It's a project that uses, quote, distinctly Marxian terms of a class struggle. And he dubs them middle American radicals, right-wing radicals. And he's writing from a conservative perspective. Now, this may keep some of the fervor of the religious right in that style of politics, but we don't see religion as the main North Star for the policy or ethics of these groups, and they don't really claim so. Indeed, it may speak to a kind of mixed conservative activism that really is more about protecting a certain way of life.
Giving parents a private right of action to be able to enforce the prohibition on CRT.
They are an activist school board.
We're not going to reorganize society and pretend that biology doesn't exist.
The Democrats are the party of pedophiles. The Democrats are the party of teachers, elementary school teachers trying to transition their elementary school age children and convince them they're a different gender.
So, some of all that might be obviously dismissed as lies, conspiracy theories. Some can be rebuked as code words for the same old ignorance, fear, and bigotry. If you watch this program, you may know we do a lot of reporting on civil rights and equality to deal with exactly those kind of code words. But if you broaden out to the shifting patterns of these tens of millions of people on religion and other issues, some of it may also reflect shifting beliefs and political alliances, which may shape our politics. And if people try to understand and reason with each other in a democracy, it is certainly worth trying to understand each other accurately as a lot of stuff changes. Take a tough, complex clash that we've always tried to treat with precision here on this news program, the COVID wars. Here's just two facts. One, people attacking science and vaccines made things much worse. Two, safety rules have trade-offs. And many of those trade-offs hit working and poor people harder, not elites. The data shows pandemic job pain fell unevenly on the poor and minorities while big companies flourished. And some of the leaders of this so-called new right have seized on COVID policy as much as any topic, skewering allegedly heavy-handed and elite-friendly COVID rules to attack Democrats. It was one of the factors that voters cited in backing first-time Republican candidate Glenn Youngkin in Virginia last year. You remember that off-year race? It may speak to what some conservatives call an overreach in a kind of liberal, technocratic approach to policy or safety or how to back or even mandate certain progressive goals. So, the debate is certainly fair game. And for those who find themselves uncomfortable at even thinking about challenging even one potential orthodoxy, well, that's usually a time to try even harder to keep an open mind. I guess alternatively, you could just watch Tucker Carlson in a fetal ball, but who wants to do that? We're not doing a version of that. And if this new conservatism involves conservatives and Republicans living a bit more like liberals, less church, less religious dogma guiding their choices and priorities, then why does the left and right seem more polarized than ever? And why, big question, is the Supreme Court still on the precipice of making Scripture the law of the land to regulate and oppress women?